Hi, I'm Suchith Tissera, a former debater at Royal College and the current head coach of Trinity College. And I'll be discussing the motion, "This House regrets the normalization of open relationships." So basically, I'll be first discussing the proposition and then I'll be discussing the opposition. And in each side, I'll be first talking about the setup and then giving a few ideas related to arguments, and in between I'll talk about strategy as well. So regarding the proposition for this motion and regretting normalization, the setup, there's a few things that are important. First is to identify the context in which this debate should take place. So first of all, I think when it comes to things like normalization of things like open relationships, it's likely to entail a more liberal Western democracy rather than a more traditional country with a traditional democracy or traditional atmosphere. In that kind of instance, where example countries like the USA or UK, and also you need to state that it's likely to be a country in which individuals currently, because of this normalization, have opted in to choose to open up their relationships in a higher frequency compared to that of the past. The second thing you need to identify in setup is the approach in which you're going to take this debate. That is to say, there's two main approaches you can tackle. First is the approach in which you regret the concept of open relationships as a whole, and the second approach you can have is regretting the normalization of open relationships. And especially in a motion related to things like open relationships, where there is a lack of content, when you only specifically regret the normalization, I would argue it's far better to make argumentations on both narratives to say, one, open relationships in and of itself as a concept is likely to be problematic, and even if you are to say on an even if level, even if that isn't true, the fact is the concept of the normalization of these relationships in and of itself is problematic regardless. The third thing you would want to tell is on talking about what kind of motion type this is. That is to say, this is a regrets motion type. So in that instance, this is a retrospective motion that deals with retrospective harms and benefits. That is to say, harms and benefits that have already taken place, and those harms and benefits needs to be discussed. And when you have the discussion regarding these harms and benefits, you need to prove on proposition why the harms of benefits or the harms of open relationships far outweigh any benefits that opposition can try to prove to you in this debate. And that is the main path to victory of a regrets motion and this motion specifically. The final thing in setup that would be important is to talk about the counter narrative that would exist assuming that open relationships don't exist. That is to say, in an instance of regrets motion, you basically say on a hypothetical world where this particular concept doesn't exist or normalization doesn't exist, what is the counter narrative that's likely to prevail? And I would argue that the best counter narrative for proposition would be to say that individuals who opt into open relationships are individuals who probably, in most cases, are individuals who seek a certain thing that they are missing in their relationship. These are individuals who might be physically or emotionally unsatisfied with the relationship that they currently have, and therefore to gain that satisfaction they use a third party through these open relationships. In that instance, what would be a better alternative would be individuals as such choosing things like therapy, for example, couples therapy for these individuals to make sure that all those things of unsatisfaction is being solved in the long run. So that is basically the setup. And next, talking about arguments, the arguments bit is more likely to be why open relationships are bad, and second argument can be why exactly the normalization of these relationships inherently are bad. So talking about why exactly open relationships in and of itself probably create more harm than good, a few reasons for this. The first reason you would argue is the amount of distrust it creates among partners. That is to say, at the point in which a discussion of normal relationship comes to be, and at the point in which you open up the relationship, the likelihood of your partner creating a large amount of distrust between each other is far greater. The reason for this is because each partner is likely to now opt into relationships with another party. Therefore, you're going to see a partner who you thought previously was exclusive going in and having relationships with other individuals. Therefore, because they have relationships with other individuals that you thought that they are not going to have. So for example, if you had a partner or a significant other, the way you treat that significant other is very different from how you treat the 99% of individuals in your life. At the point in which you now start treating another individual with the same amount of the same treatment that you would probably give your partner, what is likely to happen with that partner is that partner is going to feel jealous and going to feel mistrustful of you. So the trust that exists within your relationship is likely to fall down. The second thing which is likely to happen is, in the instance where you choose to open up your relationship, you open up your relationship for a multiplicity of reasons. The most likely scenario as to why you open up your relationship is likely to be that you have a certain thing that isn't being fulfilled within your relationship. This could be physical intimacy or things like emotional support that you feel like your partner isn't providing because maybe they are preoccupied with work or something of the sort. Insofar as that is true, assuming that you open up your relationship and find another partner who can fulfill this particular thing that is missing, what's likely to happen in most cases are you going to create an emotional attachment with this other individual. If that is to happen, what's likely to happen in the long run is you're going to detach yourself with the partner that you currently had before you opened up your relationship. So your previous partner is like you're going to detach yourself from your previous partner. If that happens, what's likely to happen is most individuals who open up their relationship are likely to opt into this new person that they are seeing through this open relationship, therefore severing the ties between the initial relationship before you opened up. And that is uniquely problematic because you basically ruin the relationship through opening it up. The third and final thing, just independent as to why open relationships cause more harm than good, is to identify the shift in power dynamics that exist. That is to say, there's a huge difference in the power dynamics of the relationships the moment an individual, one person in that relationship, suggests open relationship. The individual who suggests open relationship, irrespective of whether or not the other person agrees to that open relationship, is likely to have a lot of power within the relationship. When you have more power because you are the individual who asked this important question related to this, what's likely to happen is a shift in the power dynamics. And especially in most cases when you have instability in power within a relationship, it causes a lot of problem, it causes a lot of mistrust, it causes a lot of jealousy within individuals. Because even if a person agreed to open up the relationship, maybe that wasn't the first approach that the person wanted to. The only reason they did it was because their partner suggested it out in the first place. So there's so many multiplicity of reasons that exist as to why they would agree to do this. So when there's a shift in power dynamic, it's uniquely problematic for these individuals, which is going to likely lead into even more problems in the long run, and that is another reason as to why open relationships are likely to be problematic. Then the second argument that can be run in a proposition would be to talk about why exactly normalization in and of itself is a problematic, normalization of open relationships in and of itself is bad, and a few reasons as to why normalization is bad. The first reason as to why is the barrier of entry to have a discussion regarding open relationships is far less at the point in which it becomes a normalized concept. That is to say that previously the barrier to have this discussion to open up a relationship was a very high barrier. That means if you were only in a very unstable situation where for a long period of time or with a high degree of severity, you were in an unstable situation of emotional and physical trauma. It is only at that instance you actually opt into choosing this alternative of open relationships. However, due to normalization, that barrier reduces to a significant level. That is to say, at the point in which there is even a small amount of instability within a relationship, individuals would suggest more often than not to open up the relationships as a solution to that problem rather than dealing with the problem in a far better manner, because open relationships aren't frowned upon as much at the point in which you normalize this. So this barrier of entry, reduction of the barrier of entry basically means that even a small disagreement with partners is likely to opt into things like open relationships. The second thing you would want to talk about is how the idea of open relationships desensitizes individuals into like having affairs with other individuals. That is to say, in the past, even though there was a slight distinction between outright cheating and open relationship, the majority of society did not find that distinction to be so prevalent that you would not call an open relationship cheating, or suggesting to have an open relationship in and of itself to be cheating. However, as society has changed, they've like scrutinized with that distinction and come to that conclusion that, oh look, an open relationship doesn't inherently mean cheating. However, but the problem with that is it desensitizes individuals into believing that you having another partner outside of your initial relationship is not cheating. That means that society is moving in a direction that's uniquely problematic. That is to say, you aren't able to have just one partner, and it's fine to have other partners. So the trickle-down negative effect of that is, in the long run, you're more susceptible to individuals who say that, oh look, things like cheating is far less like to be problematic or something wrong, because even things like open relationships where you have other partners in other instances is something that is fine. So in that instance, it's a negative trickle-down effect that is uniquely problematic. The third and final thing to talk about is how individuals are unlikely to opt into other solutions when a normalization of things like open relationships exists. The reason as to why this is necessarily true is because most individuals, at the point in which the normalization have taken place, these individuals, rather than going into things like couples therapy, for example, are more likely to opt into things like open relationships. And that is uniquely problematic because they find this open relationship as an easy solution. However, in most cases, this solution is a solution that's not likely to solve the initial problem, much rather cause more problems. So what this normalization has inherently done, it has caused individuals to try to solve their problems using an easy solution without actually putting the effort into like going into things like therapy, and that is uniquely problematic. So those are all the argumentation and like setup related to open relationships and why open relationships are regrettable and the normalization is regrettable. So then moving on to opposition. And here in opposition, there's a few ways to counteract a lot of what I was talking about as in proposition. The firstly is to just set up the debate in a way which mitigates and like puts correct parameters into which individuals you're discussing this debate about. The first thing you need to talk about is that this debate is, and this is again on opposition side, set up an opposition. The first thing you would want to discuss is to say that this debate is about two individuals who both consented to having to open up their relationship. That is to say, it's irrespective of whether or not one person suggested and one person suggested, the fact is the other individual also consented to having their relationship opened up, and it isn't an individual going behind their back. We aren't discussing about individuals who go behind their back, which we would entail as cheating. The second thing is to talk about how exactly open relationships take place. There's two ways. One, relationships that start out being open relationships. Therefore, you find a partner, and before you actually start your relationship, from the initial stage as well, the relationship is open. But the second, more likely situation is individuals who are probably feeling down because of certain instability within the relationship, opting into open relationships because they don't find a solution within their situation, right? The next thing we would want to say on opposition is to counteract the counter narrative that proposition would give. That is to say, if this normalization of open relationships didn't exist, individuals who are in unstable situations emotionally and physically are far more likely to opt into things like cheating rather than going out for therapy. And you can give reasons here as to why this is necessarily true. The first reason would be, in most instances, the individuals you are likely to talk about are Western individuals who are from Western societies, because that is where normalization takes place. But the second thing, they are likely to be younger individuals who are like more Gen Z and more individuals who aren't from like an old generation. So these individuals specifically are people who have grown up not necessarily believing that therapy might be the best solution, especially couples therapy. And the second reason as to why therapy might not be a likely alternative is because therapy is something that is long term. It doesn't entail results in the short term. Therefore, when individuals again are irrational because they are in an unstable situation emotionally and physically, they are unlikely to opt into short-term, long-term solutions that might not get them the results in the short term. So they are unlikely to opt into like these long processes of like therapy. So the far likely more realistic option is individuals cheating, which is likely to be far worse on proposition side, assuming that normalization of open relationships doesn't exist. In that instance, then you create that kind of context where you say, because open relationship existed or the normalization existed, individuals had a third option rather than cheating or going to therapy, which in the most cases is likely to be a cheating, and that is why it's beneficial as a contextual matter. So then let's discuss as to why exactly normalization is the normalization of open relationship benefit. But one other thing quickly before that is to talk about exactly what normalization means in this instance. That is to say, you're not going to reduce relationships where like monogamous relationships. Much rather, you're just going to have another type of relationship existing. That is to say, opposition's burden isn't to say that exclusive relationships are bad or in any sense. Much rather is to prove that open relationships and the normalization of those relationships, if both parties are consenting, is okay and something that you should provide, right? In that instance, let's talk about the benefits of normalization. The first benefit you can talk about, and this is going into the context of who exactly this motion is dealing with, regarding younger generations of individuals. Assuming it's younger generations of individuals, the majority of these individuals are unlikely to be able to settle down in very high frequency, because these individuals are still in a stage where they are looking out to understand their needs and their desires to the greatest extent. So if that is the case, previous societal norms have put it so that if you are in a relationship, you are unable to look at other individuals to see what they offer you in the long run as well. But because of this societal change of normalization of open relationships, now you have the option where you are able to explore other options to see what exactly benefits you to the greatest extent while still being in the relationship. That is to say, for your own growth, you're able to now see other options much rather than being like trickled down to one relationship when you find this one person at one point in your life. But another thing you can argue here is individuals who have a hard time communicating and hard time committing for relationships and now have an outlet to actually better themselves. That is to say, individuals who come from broken families, for example, people who come from families that are divorced, who don't want to have commitment, the normalization of open relationships have given them an outlet for them to heal, where they can still have someone that they like, but they can still have an open relationship where they can explore what other options that exist for them to become a better person through self-improvement and exploration. So their freedom to now choose and freedom to express themselves is far greater through the idea of open relationships. The second thing I want to discuss here as to why normalization is good is individuals who are already in a relationship that is unstable, how those individuals through the idea of open relationships are likely to be benefited. That is to say, those individuals first are likely to create better discussions. Why? In the past, those individuals are likely to have opted into cheating, as I mentioned before, compared to going into things like therapy. Because of that, in most cases, these individuals have opted into just ending their relationship in and of itself. But however, in the current instance, through discussing about open relationships, there's multiplicity of ways this can work out. First way is at the moment in which you bring up the fact about open relationships to your partner is likely to see that the reason why I bring up this open relationship is because my relationship and the way I've been giving out like emotional and physical like giving you any benefits have not been enough to make sure that you're satisfied. Insofar as that is the case, through the idea of normalization, because now it's a normal thing to open up and talk about open relationships, through that idea of normalization, what happens is partners are now able to come to a discussion regarding instances where they're not necessarily satisfied. If that is the case, partners are able to actually go out and try to satisfy you in an emotional level, in assuming that you aren't satisfying your partner in the previously. But the second thing is, let's assume you bring up the fact about open relationships, and you all don't come to a middle ground to say, oh, I don't need an open relationship, and they don't solve their problem through the discussion about open relationship. Even in that instance, at the point in which you open up the relationship, what happens is the partner who feels unsatisfied is able to now get a satisfaction. So irrespective, they have a net benefit where in one instance they are able to get the satisfaction through you having the discussion, your partner actually changing the ways that they were handling themselves. But even if that isn't the case, the second way, if they open up their relationship, they are able to now get that satisfaction if they find it out from another individual. But assuming they don't find it out from another individual, they might realize that they actually love their partner even more, and it might even create a greater bond and like affection towards your initial partner even further, right? But finally, if your partner doesn't agree to open relationship and doesn't put any effort into like solving your situation even great at any level, what's likely to happen is, irrespective of whether or not you have like an emotional attachment to your partner, you're likely to see between the lines and say, oh look, my partner isn't providing me with the satisfaction I need, but isn't letting me find that satisfaction elsewhere temporarily until they are able to provide me with the satisfaction. Maybe I'm in the wrong relationship, and they're able to make and come to a better decision compared to before, where they would have opted into things like cheating or bring up things like therapy, which they would have taken too long for them to actually get that satisfaction, and they would have just opted into cheating anyway while going into therapy, because therapy would have taken too long. So basically, the final impact of this idea is, through these discussions about open relationships, the person who brought up this discussion has a multiplicity of ways of getting better off, and in the best case situation, you are likely to create better communication and stronger bonds within your partner at the point in which you have that discussion. The final thing you would want to talk about is societal norms, and how more liberal societies want to provide you with a better amount of choices. That is to say, in the past, at the point in which you have conflict within your relationship, there were only a few options to do. The first option was to break up with your partner, which is unlikely to happen assuming this debate exists. It's likely to be you have a certain connection with your partner even though you're in an unstable situation. The second option you're likely to see is individuals choosing to cheat, and the third option is likely to be individuals going into therapy. However, importantly, now you provide a fourth option for individuals who are in these situations, and inherently, just by the virtue of the fact you provide more options, that is inherently a benefit that you need to entail, and that is a benefit that normalization of open relationship and the existence of open relationship has provided. And therefore, because there's more options for these individuals to take place, the likelihood of positive benefits and the positive outcomes increase as well, because of the fact that you now have higher options and because you have better discussions. So basically, those are the argumentations as to why exactly normalization of open relationship isn't something that is regrettable, and that is basically it for this motion.